This is going to be part 2 in the series of bedside dresser. So what has happened is we have glued up our side panels. We've cut all of the material for our web frames and our shelves. And we've glued up our shelf piece as well. So what's going to happen today is we are going to take our side pieces, which have already been planed to final thickness, and squared up to their final lengths and widths, and we're going to cut a rabbet joint, 2 dado joints, and a groove in the back of our piece. So the purpose of these joints is the rabbet on top is designed to hold the top web frame so we can screw down our top piece. The middle dado is designed to hold the bottom of the drawer. So basically this allows us to slide our drawer. And then the bottom dado is designed to hold the shelf for our piece, right? In the back, what the groove is designed for is so we can nail a panel on the back so we can make this an enclosed space both behind the drawer and behind the door of our piece. So before we even go to the dado blade table saw, what we need to do is we need to go to our packet and look at our instructions for how to lay this out. So let's cut closer to that. So in the packet, we have a rabbet from the top end of the piece 3/4 of an inch down, and you're going to mark that across the grain. And then from there, you've got a dado at 5 1/4, and the other half is at 6 inches. So if I were to measure down from the end, I should have one line at 6 inches from the end and one line at 5 1/4. And then down at the bottom, I should have another dado that's 2 1/4 to the one side of the dado, and then to the other side it should be 2 1/4 plus 3/4, which is 3. So from here to here is 3. From the bottom to the inside of the dado is 2 1/4. Once those have been laid out, we can go to the dado blade table saw and make those cuts. So to create our side pieces, we're going to need to cut 2 joints here at the 3/4 dado blade table saw. So what's special about this saw is that we have multiple blades stacked together to create a blade that will cut exactly 3/4 of an inch, which is the thickness of our top, middle web frame and our shelf. Right? Now if you remember, again in your packet, we've laid out our lines at a rabbet for 3/4 of an inch from the end, 6 inch, a dado 6 inches down from the same end, and then from the opposite end, you're going to do a dado 3 inches up from that end. Right? Once you have them laid out, what we're going to do is we're going to set the table saw to that height. So normally, what we would do is you would set it to whatever the thickness is, halfway. So if this is a 3/4 thick piece of wood, we would set it to 3/8. In this case, this is set to a 1/2 inch. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to take our combination square and we're going to set it to 1/2 inch. What we want to do is we want to lift the blade to the highest point we can find, and then place our combination square on top of it. It's important to have a combination square with a bubble in it, because what we're going to do is we're going to use that to determine the exact height of the blade. What you're going for is you want the bubble just between the 2 lines as you're setting it. So once it's between the 2 lines, it is set at the exact height that you have set on your piece. So right now I've set it to exactly 1/2 inch, and what I would do is I'd cut, my first joint I would cut would be my rabbet. So I'd set my combination square to 3/4 because that's what the rabbet's going to be. And I'm going to measure from the outside body of the blade, making sure that I contact at least 2 teeth so that I know my combination square is flat against the blade. Tap my fence over, lock it down. Now one thing I need to check before I make my cut is I need to make sure that my miter gauge is square to the fence. So there should be no gap here and there should be no gap here. Once your miter gauge has been set, you would take your two side pieces making sure that if you're going to do a specific edge, let's just say this is my good edge, I would mark GE or good edge, put one against my miter gauge fence, and the other would be edge out. The reason why you switch it is because to make a left and a right piece, right, the edges have to be cut separate. All right. So once those have been cut, then we can move on down to the center datum. So we take that measurement from the outside of the datum. So if I measure from here to here, it's exactly 6 inches. So I'll set my combination square to 6 inches now, not changing the blade height. I want to keep that consistent. So I set it to 6. Tap the fence over. Place my board against my miter gauge. Now, one thing I didn't mention is that my left hand, my focus is pushing directly back into this hand here, kind of like a bench plane, right? I want my force to be pulling this back into my other hand, whereas my other hand is exactly my drive hand. So I'm going to drive this piece through the cut, right? Bring it off to the side and bring back the miter gauge. Reach for my second piece. And repeat that same cut. Right? Now that we've cut the center datum, we're going to cut the bottom datum. Now we're going to reset the fence again to 3 inches. From the outside of the blade, tap it over. So I make contact. Now I don't want to make contact inside here because that will not be exactly accurate. I want it to touch the outside fence. Once I make that contact, set up a piece, run it through. Sorry. Try my opposite one. Run it through. Once all 3 have been cut, we're going to go to the 1/2 inch data blade table saw, where we're going to cut the rear groove. Right? And once the rear groove's been cut, we can start looking to make the web frame for your dresser. Now we're at the 1/2 inch data blade table saw. What we're going to do here is we're going to cut the rear groove on our side pieces. Right? And the depth of the groove should be equal to each other. So it should be 3/8 by 3/8. What that means is the distance from the inside of the blade to the fence is 3/8, and since it's a 1/2 inch, it's going to go underneath the fence for the cut. And I want to set the blade height the same. There we go. So let me just cover one quick thing before we go any farther. Is that this is a sacrificial fence. There is the actual fence on this part and then the main fence frame here. Again, when we're cutting this type of groove, so we're cutting with the grain, we always want to use a sacrificial fence so that we don't damage our real fence. All right? So I'll just double check the measurements one more time, making sure it's 3/8 up. It's 3/8 up. And then 3/8 from the side. Right? Once that's set, I'm going to take my good edges, or my GEs that we had labeled before, and I want them to be on the outside of the fence. So a cool trick I do is I put them together and then squash them down. then this is the order you feed them in. So one of them, the rabbit, will go first. The other one, the bottom of the case, would go first. So what I would do is I would turn it on, run it through. Now you notice I'm using both hands throughout the entire cut. This is different than normal operation from the shop because since I'm not cutting all the way through the piece of wood and there is no piece to be pinched between the blade, you may use just your hands to run it through the piece. Making the table saw. Right? And that's how we're going to cut the grooves on the back of our project. Right? Now again, what I'm doing with my left and right hand is I'm pressing both downward and against the fence. Right? Obviously, I'm not going to be running my finger with the edge through the blade. I want my hands nice and far out here, following the rule of threes. So we're going to at least 3 inches out as I'm running it through. So with that said, let's move on to the next step. One side note in this process is that before the web frame, you should create your shelf, all right, and make it to its rough measurements. All right. Once it's been glued up, got the grains alternating, you can plane this down to its final thickness of 3/4, square it to its final measurements, and set it to the side until your web frame is done. That's what we're going to cover next. So the next steps in the process is to create our web frame. Now, the remaining pieces that you have, you need to have enough to create 2 web frames. So that's 4 pieces each, and all of them must be planed down to exactly 3/4 of an inch. All right, they should run pretty tightly in your dados, because again, if you don't do it to the correct thickness, what we call the tongue and groove joint will not fit well. So what we see here on the end is a tongue and groove joint. So this is the tongue and this is the groove. So what we're going to do here at this table saw is we're going to cut the groove, and then when we go to cut the tongue, we're going to go back to the 1/2 inch data blade table saw to cut that part. So here, what we're going to do is we're going to cut the stiles. So the stiles are always the longest part of our frame. The rails will be the shortest part. All right? So once I have all my stiles cut to their final measurements, so the final length, final width, final thickness, I'm going to come to this grooving table saw, which is already preset to the measurement, so you don't have to change it. You'll turn it on, cut into the groove on the same edge, and repeat this 4 times. Right? Once you've made your stiles, we go to the 1/2 inch data blade table saw to make our rails. So when I come back here, I should have all my rail pieces. So this is just a practice piece. All my rail pieces plus a practice piece out of pine. The reason why the practice piece is important is because the pine we have is exactly 3/4 thickness, which should be the same as your stiles. All right? So what we're going to do is we're going to cut our rail tongue here on the 1/2 inch data blade table saw, and then test fit it with our practice piece. Once our practice piece fits, all right, then we can do it to our real pieces as well. So to get the blade height, what we're going to do is we're going to measure the shoulders of the tongue, the groove here. Looking at 3/16. So I'm going to reset the blade, the bubble in the middle, to 3/16. Now to find the depth of the groove, here's a cool trick. Put my combination square right over top. I'm going to push this flat to the bottom. I'm going to push this flat to the bottom. Once it's touching, I got 1/2 inch. So I'm going to move fence out. And set it to 1/2 inch. Once that's set, I'm going to test cut. And it fits perfectly. Right? Now again, the blade height will, vary depending on your piece. Because again, if you didn't plane this perfectly thick to the correct thickness, you are going to have to change the height of your tongue. So that fits really good. Awesome. So then you would repeat this cut both faces, both ends for each rail piece. And then once those are completed, you can glue them up. So when I come back here, I should have all my rail pieces. So this is just a practice piece. All my rail pieces plus a practice piece out of pine. The reason why the practice piece is important is because the pine we have is exactly 3/4 thickness, which should be the same as your stiles, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to cut our rail tongue here on the 1/2 inch Day-Blade table saw, and then test fit it with our practice piece. Once our practice piece fits, all right, then we can do it to our real pieces as well. So to get the blade height, what we're going to do is we're going to measure the shoulders of the tongue, the groove here. Looking at 3/16. So I'm going to reset the blade, the bubble in the middle, to 3/16. Now to find the depth of the groove, here's a cool trick. I put my combination square right over top. I'm going to push this flat to the bottom. I'm going to push this flat to the bottom. Once it's touching, I got 1/2 inch. So I'm going to move fence out. And set it to 1/2 inch. Once that's set, I'm going to test cut. And it fits perfectly. Right? Now again, the blade height will, vary depending on your piece. Because again, if you didn't plane this perfectly thick to the correct thickness, you are going to have to change the height of your tongue. So that fits really good. Awesome. So then you would repeat this cut both faces, both ends for each rail piece. And then once those are completed, you can glue them up. Once you've glued up your web frames, you're going to pick one of the two to be the top web frame of your project. On that web frame, you're going to lay out 4 holes per stile and 2 per rail. And what these holes are going to do is they're going to screw down your top piece. Right? Once you've laid out your marks, all right, evenly spaced, you're going to come to the drill press here, and you're going to drill all the way through each of those holes. Once that's set, we have a special drill with what's called a countersink drill bit, and you're going to countersink these holes until the top of the screw fits through that. Right? Once that's done, you're going to glue up your entire case. So with that said, we'll do that next time.